Welcome to the Bean Pod. In this episode, I talked to two students who have taken and aced the LNAT exam. One is an LNAT tutor and the other a student who took it in the last year. We hope that their advice is useful in helping you to do really well in this exam too. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of the Beam Pod. I'm very excited about the next set of episodes because they're all about the important admissions test. With me today, this is especially great for me because it's completing a full circle. I have with me Yo Soo Jin, who was in the first batch of students that I had in the Law Society at College Tuanku Jaffa. And then also joined with me is Amber Hani Mohammed Firdaus, who was in the final batch of students that I had in the Law Society at KTJ. So thank you so much for joining me, you two. Great that we're going to hear your advice on how to ace the LNAT exam. So Sujin, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, like Emma mentioned, I was in KTJ for 4 years. I did my IGs and A levels there. I then did my law undergrad in LSE, finished my bar, continued tutoring in the UK for another 2 years. One of the subjects that I tutored was the LNAT, and then now I'm working at Sunway International School.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Amber.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amber. I'm currently an upper sixth at College Tuanku Jaffa. I'm a bank scholar and I recently received an offer from Somerville at Oxford. So hopefully I'll be going there in the fall. Yeah.
Very good. Fantastic. Congratulations to both of you on your success in the LNAT exam and also all the things that you're doing now. All right. So let's just kick off with a little roundup of what the LNAT exam is. And what kind of things that you should be looking out for. So first of all, anything to do with LNAT, go to the official LNAT site because dates often change. So that's lnat.ac.uk. So the dates they have on the moment are for the current 2025-26 cycle. They may change for the 2026-27 cycle. Okay, so generally the registration opens on the 1st of August. Now, if you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge, like Amber did, then you need to make sure you register by about mid-September. The minute it's 15th of September for the current year, and you have to sit the exam by the 15th of October. King's, UCL, the LSE, they have a deadline of the 31st of December, Bristol, Durham, 14th of January, and any others may have a deadline a little bit later, the 20th of January. So you have to register this. This is not your schools. You register. You do the exam at a Pearson's Test Centre. My advice is to register early so that you get a test center near you. You get the dates that you want. You definitely don't want to be registering and doing the test just a few days before your deadline, because in the past I have known students who have been ill and they've still had to do the exam even though they're ill because they're right at the deadline. So give yourself a little bit of time to move the exam later if something happens and you're not in a fit shape to actually do it on the day that you wanted. And the other big advice is to make sure that you have a mix of LNAT and non-LNAT universities, because you can only do this exam once in a current application cycle. It only lasts that year. So if you take a year out, you have to redo it. And so because you only get the results in mid-February for your MCQ section, you don't know how well you did with it. So you need to make sure you have a non-LNAT university as a backup. So that's something like Nottingham, Warwick, Manchester, Queen Mary, all those good universities for law. And, you know, don't pack out all five as the Oxford, Cambridge, King's, UCL, LSE, Bristol, Durham, the ones that are the LNAT ones. Okay, so that's just a rough, quick intro. So, Sujin, do you want to tell us about when you sat the exam? Because you were applying to the LSE, so you didn't have that early deadline.
Yeah, no. So I believe I sat for my LNAT sometime around either December or early January, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, all right. And Amber, you had to do yours a bit earlier.
Yeah, I did mine on the 10th of October. So quite close to the deadline, but I also had a resit. So I had to schedule it around my resit. Not the best recommendation.
Yes, so that's a really important point that actually for all of these admissions tests, if you're applying to Oxbridge, you're sitting them in October. And that's when some of the students will be doing AS exams or they might be doing maths papers.
Yeah.
So yeah, you really need to do your prep and the groundwork for the admissions test early because you can't be cramming at the last minute because you've actually got these
Yeah.
public exams as well. So you had quite a lot to juggle there, Amber.
Yeah, but I managed.
Great stuff. Okay. So let's start with Amber. So you obviously had this pinch point of deadlines. When did you start thinking about the LNAT and preparing for it?
I started my preparation in 3 phases: pre-AS, the summer break, and the start of upper six. So I would say that I started getting exposure pre-AS. So around this time, actually, this time in lower six, February, March, where we did our trial paper with you, Miss Emma. And that was the first time I ever got exposed to the LNAT questions. But I properly started in the summer break when we took the extra classes for LNAT preparation. And that was when I actually focused on the LNAT itself. But then closer to my exam, I focused on the essay bit because that was the hardest for me, unfortunately.
Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, so you had it in 3 different stages. So you were doing mainly MCQ. So the exam's got 2 parts. One is the MCQ based on reading, and the other part is the essay.
Yeah.
So you felt the essay was harder.
I felt the essay was harder because a lot of times when people talk about the LNAT, they do talk about how it's really hard for you to get through the 42 questions in the MCQ within the 90 minutes. But I find that that wasn't my issue because I could read really fast and I find myself comprehending the passages quite well. But I did struggle with the essays because I didn't know how to get high enough or convicting enough, if that makes sense. Convincing enough, sorry. And I struggled with that a lot. So because for Oxford, they looked at both the essay and the MCQ, so I had to prepare for both equally. Yeah.
Okay. And so doing a mock MCQ test early on and doing full MCQ test was useful because it meant that you knew that was actually a strength of yours and somewhere that you shouldn't be spending too much time on.
Yeah. I only
Okay.
spent time on the MCQ a few days before the exam just to polish up my comprehension.
Okay, fantastic. Sujin, so that's interesting that the essay was the harder part. So you've been tutoring students in the past for the LNAT exam. Is that something that's typical that most people find the essay harder?
No, I would say that most of the students that come to me, typically they're looking for help on the MCQ, not on the essay.
Okay. And so what timeline would you recommend that they have to start doing MCQ questions and full MCQ timed papers?
Okay, so I think it would depend. So obviously, if you're applying to Oxbridge, it would sort of change that sort of consideration because then you'd also have to be preparing yourself for the admission test there. But assuming that you are only going to be preparing for the LNAT, I would say 3-4 months in advance would be prudent. I wouldn't do it 1 or 2 months in advance, like maybe I might have did when I was doing it. It was a bit rushed, but 3-4 months I think is good.
Okay. So generally students that do quite well 3 or 4 months. All right. So let's just go back. So you've spent a lot of time teaching the MCQ. What kind of skills does the MCQ test?
Okay, so the thing about the LNAT is that prior to this, usually the highest level of sort of exams that students would have experienced prior would be their IGCSEs, right? And the issue with that is the IGCSE, if I can speak just with some candor for a moment, it's not the most difficult exam individually. I think where the difficulty of the IGCSE comes in is that you have to take 10 subjects, right? And you have to balance all 10 subjects at the same time. But the actual depth of the test that you're taking, it's fairly shallow relative to what you'll encounter later on. So when students are preparing for the LNAT, one thing that I notice a lot is that they treat it like an IG's test. So they're just going to try and blaze through as many MCQs as they can. You're just, okay, finish. And then they will just, oh, what, sir, why did I get this wrong? I got all of these questions wrong. Then I'll tell them why. Then they're like, okay. Then they just continue doing more papers without actually properly reflecting on what went wrong and how they can sort of improve their cognitive processes. So if you're asking for what is being tested on the LNAT, I would say it's mostly comprehension and understanding. It's almost nothing to do with surrounding knowledge or contextual knowledge.
Yeah. I know when in the Law Society we've done past papers, and I've actually got some of them wrong, because if you know about a subject and you bring that knowledge in to help you answer the question, that's completely the worst thing to do, because you're being tested on what the text says in front of you. So definitely don't worry if you don't have knowledge of a lot of these different subjects. And in fact, you shouldn't be bringing that knowledge in. Is that correct, Sujin?
Yeah, so it happened a lot of times as well when they are answering, a student would be answering a question, and I just ask them a simple question of, where in the passage does it say that? And then I'll tell them to highlight it, and usually they're like, oh, I guess it doesn't actually say that in the passage. And then they realize, oh yeah, the LNAT is not about your own personal opinion. It's not about your own sort of takes. It's all about what's in the passage. If it's not in the passage, it's not the answer.
Okay. So if someone is doing repeated past MCQ papers and they're sort of struggling to make much headway on them, what sort of activities should they be doing to improve their score?
Okay, so I think before we even get to the stage where you've been doing a lot of MCQ questions and nothing sort of taking, I would say a really difficult LNAT paper, as a student, you should really savor it, because you're not going to find, look, the truth is that a lot of the LNAT tests that you're going to find out there, they don't do you the decency of actually explaining why the answer is correct, right? There will just be a mark scheme at the back that says question 1 is A, question 2 is B, so on and so forth. So a lot of the time when you're blazing through a difficult paper and you're not taking away the correct learnings from why you got that question wrong, I think that's the first part where students fail, because they treat it like the IGCSE, where there's a set amount of content to learn. Like, for example, in the IGs, if you just keep doing chemistry past papers, eventually there's only so much knowledge. You're going to eventually learn everything. That's not the case for the LNAT, because all of the passages and descriptions that they can come up with are incredibly novel. There is no way you can memorize anything. So I would say the number one thing you should do is, after you do a paper, write down, I think you can take it slow at first, write down what your thought process was, why you chose this answer. Feel free to go beyond the time limit at first. And when you find out what the answer is, analyze and write down why it is you thought a certain way, why that way of thinking was wrong, and what the correct way was. That I found tended to be the best way to sort of put students on track to getting great marks.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so it's a very similar comment that I've heard from the tutors in the STEM admissions test, that really drill down into why you got that wrong. And you might see some patterns as well. And the other thing might be why you got something right as well.
Yeah.
All right, Amber. So what was your way of preparing for the MCQ?
I think very similar to what Sujin advised. Maybe it was partly due to the time I had. I had such a relatively shorter time to prepare. And so I prepared more for my PS and for my retakes. So I had to really pick wisely what I wanted to do with my time. And so every time I dedicated to the MCQ, I did exactly what Sujin did. I had this, I only used one book for the LNAT. It was I have a picture of it. I saved it for this. It was this book. It was in the Law Society.
Just hold that up a little bit more.
This one.
Ah, that one.
Yeah.
We have them in the Sixth Form Centre. Yes.
That's where I got it from.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that was the only book I religiously clung on to for the LNAT preparation, because it was the only book that I found that had the explanations on why that the mark scheme says A, why it was A. And so I still have a sticky note from my preparation time last time, and I only did 4 papers full, like under timed conditions. And so every other time I did MCQ, I didn't time myself because I knew that wasn't the problem. I just focused more on why the answer was that answer. And so when I did do the time ones, I progressively got better. The last one was 35 out of 42. But that also being said, I focused more on besides the one from the book, I went on the LNAT website and did the trial ones because I find that those ones were harder than the ones on the internet. I think the ones on the internet falsely market it sometimes because you think you did really well when you do an like online paper, like, oh, I got like 40 out of 42 and that's great. And then you do an actual one from the LNAT and it's like 18 out of 42. So I think most of the time, whatever you need to prepare for the LNAT is already on the website. It just helps that you have some external resources, but I wouldn't worry too much if we didn't have, because I didn't find myself having such an issue with lack of time. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Really good advice. And did you actually do any LNAT papers with peers and then discuss your answers as well?
I spent a lot of time discussing with my peers in the third phase when I started in upper six, because there was a few of us applying for Oxbridge Law as well. So it was a close knit of 5 to 6 of us. So we did LNAT papers together, especially the MCQ. None of us did essays together. We didn't have the time for that. But MCQs, and then we would go over the hard questions. A few of us did it more often than others. And so we discussed exactly why we got it wrong. And then even when we got it right, we had to explain why we got it right because other people obviously got it wrong. And so sharing that thought process, is like, oh yeah, like I see why you thought that way. So I can say that when I did it in the exam, with the actual exam, I sort of applied other people's way of thinking. And I think that helped me a lot. So I wouldn't, if there's one like piece of advice, I wouldn't do the LNAT alone. It's definitely a group effort, I would say.
Okay, fantastic. I agree. And also, you're explaining the thought process is great practice if you're having an Oxbridge interview as well. Brilliant. Okay, so Sujin, you agree with that advice? Is that something you found that's useful too?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think just being able to bounce ideas off of someone else is a massively helpful thing to be able to do for both parties involved. So yeah, 100%. Do it in a group, do it with someone who you trust, someone who cares, yeah, for sure.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Any further tips on the MCQ before we move on to that essay, the hard essay? Any final tips on MCQ?
So I would say that one thing that a lot of my students told me that they found helpful when they were actually doing the test. So this would depend on where you're doing the test, like which center you're doing. I'm not so sure about this, but for me personally, when I was sitting for the LNAT, I was just in a room by myself. And if you are in a room by yourself and you're not disturbing anyone, I strongly, strongly recommend you verbalize all of your thoughts. Whatever it is you're thinking, whatever your rationale is, whatever you're reading, say all of it out loud. It helps a lot with sort of, if you read it in your mind, when you're reading something, you might miss certain words or details that are actually pretty crucial to answering the question, right? So try and read it out. I think it's actually massively helpful.
Great. Yeah. Good advice. And again, good practice for the interview. That's exactly what the interview is. Amber, any final tips for the MCQ?
For the MCQ itself, I was going to say something similar because I did my test at a test center where they were doing ESAT as well. So I was sat in a room with other people, but they isolated me a little bit. And so even verbalizing it, like whispering it, sort of helped you plan out your thoughts, because reading everything and jumbling it up in your head is really not going to help with clarity that they need to answer the question. So I find myself repeating the question time and time again in order for me to actually understand what they were trying to ask me. And because it's on a screen, so most of the time when we do practice questions, we tend to have like a pencil and we underline certain things, but you can't really do that in the LNAT. And so having your voice help you navigate, having your voice helping you navigate the paragraphs really, really helped me, especially being a talkative person. It really helps with my train of thought.
Okay, amazing. Great advice, actually. I've never heard that before, so that's really useful. All right, so let's move on to the essay part. So Sujin, in the lead up to the exam, we're talking about, thinking of Amber's timescale of these 3 sections. So when the students are in year 12 or the lower 6, what kind of things can they be doing to get ready for the essay?
So something I think is really, really helpful for wanting to engage with these kinds of topics that they ask you for the LNAT essays is participate in a debate club. Go out and do debates, because a lot of what you'll see in the LNAT sort of questions, the essay questions, are typically just debate motions. Like a lot of them are debate motions, and being able to engage with that content and you sort of familiarize yourself with what are you going to say as the opposition, as the government, these kinds of things, it's so massively helpful. So go and participate in debate. And if you're a lawyer, if you're sitting for the LNAT, this is a skill that you should cultivate anyway. So definitely go for that.
Okay, Amber, I think I know what your answer is going to be, but do you agree with that?
Oh my God, I massively agree. Because he's like, what he said is right. Most of the time, my issue with the essay is my structure or balancing the arguments, like pro and cons. But in terms of the topic itself, being a debater, like being part of a debate club for so long, has familiarized with me with so many topics that I know for a fact people who were not debaters before this had a disadvantage in preparing, because they not only had to structure their essay, they also had to familiarize themselves with the content. So a lot of things that LNAT talks about, like elections, democracy, euthanasia, like abortions, all of those kind of things, I really think that if you have the time, especially in lower 6, expose yourself, whether it be through Model UN or through conferences or debate. Just the easiest one is debate, because the point is not to be the correct person. The point is to gain as much as perspectives as possible so that you can use it in your essay.
Okay, great, right, good advice. And for both of you, do you think it's important to follow the news? I mean, I guess if you're in the MUN or debate club, you have to follow the news anyway, right? So keeping up to date with current affairs, is that important and helpful?
So I think that following the news, look, the truth is that it can't hurt. Like keeping up to date on current affairs will always be a useful thing for you to be able to do. What I will say is that not all of the questions, if I'm not mistaken, only some of the questions will be topics that actually require sort of topical affairs, but most of them will be, there's more generic stuff, like, for example, should euthanasia be legal, abortion, all these kinds of things.
Yeah. I think similarly, you don't have to follow the news religiously, but it really does do a lot of benefit because it helps in your examples. So for me personally, I didn't follow the news religiously, but I was always on Twitter. And so whatever headlines I saw, I just read about it briefly. And so that can be brought up in a essay topic as an example. But I never found an issue with an essay that particularly tested your knowledge. They just wanted to test your argumentation skills. So I feel like that's a misconception that a lot of people have. If you ask me to explain sanctions to you, I probably can't. I don't take economics, but I can tell you why it is relatively a good or bad idea, simply because you practice with a little bit of content, but more of argumentation.
Okay, understood. Let's just think about the skills that you need to write these essays. I mean, you were saying, Amber, that you had the content in your head, but often it was the way that it was structured. So what kind of skills do you think you were developing in these essays, and how did you improve them?
I think the skill that I gained from preparing for this essay is disagreeing with myself. So most of these topics, because I was relatively familiar with the general topic, not the question itself, but the topic, I sort of had a preconceived notion or opinion on it already. And so the skill that I had to learn for the LNAT is to disagree with myself and disagree with enough content to back it up. So I think what was really helpful was to talk to another person. What I did was to find another person that I knew always disagreed with me, or like we always have banter. And the person was also applying for an admissions test that needed an essay. So whenever we had a topic, we would both like take a side. Like I would be agreeing, he would be disagreeing, and so it helped into like, oh yeah, okay, so I can use that, and so it's a mini debate club, but it only requires 2 people for it. So closer to the date, I didn't find writing essays helpful. It was just asking an essay topic and discussing it time and time again with someone. Really helps you to think of both sides for the essay.
Yeah, it's about speaking to other people, bouncing ideas and growth together. I mean, this is the whole thing that we have. This is the whole premise of Beam, is that 2 + 2 is 5. You lift each other up by working together. These people that work in silos for these things, not necessarily the most successful by a long way. So Sujin, and as a tutor of students who are trying to do the essay, how can you try and encourage them to improve those essay writing skills and structuring their arguments and seeing both sides, finding evidence that's relevant to support arguments?
So what I'll say to that is unfortunately, there is no cheat. There is no LNAT that will give you all of the possible topics that you need to prepare for. It's just practice. This is just content that you should be engaging with in the first place. If you want to be a lawyer, you're going to see a lot of this in uni. So definitely just keep on going at it. Keep on engaging with these kinds of topics, whether they are political or philosophical, all this, just keep on engaging with them. I would say in terms of the actual essay writing skills, there are a lot of different ways to go about it. A lot of my students, they have vastly different ways of approaching an essay. And there's really no wrong answer, right? How you want to structure it, so long as it's coherent, it's fine. What tends to be missing is just the ability to produce a discursive piece of work. That's something that, again, unless they take like a history sort of subject for A levels, it's something that a lot of students have not engaged with prior, so they struggle a little bit.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people think that sort of over flowery verbose language is what's being looked for, but it's not actually. It's clarity. So, if you're listening to this and you're worried that your level of English is maybe not as high as someone who's doing, say, literature, that's not the point. You can still put your arguments very clearly, convincingly, and you're advocating an argument. I mean, you must have found that a big variety of people, Amber, with the people that are doing the LNAT.
I do, because being someone who was from national syllabus myself, I thought that I was at a disadvantage because these people seemed to know what they were talking about. Like my IGCSE friends, they knew what they were talking about. And a lot of these, like two out of three of my subjects were really new to me at A levels, and they were econs and history. But they did really help me in the essay writing, because they force you to think of a conclusion and a comparison. And I found that really easy to do by the time I had to do my LNAT essay. So I sort of wrote my personal LNAT essay like a history essay. So you would agree, and then you disagree with yourself, but then there's a caveat at the end of every paragraph, something like that. But I didn't focus on impressive words. I know that there are some people who are impressed by like flowery language, but that wasn't the biggest issue for me. I didn't think that was as important as, let's say, like actually structuring or balancing out my arguments. So I would say to anyone that's worried about English proficiency for the LNAT, I think that so long as you are able to explain your ideas in even like to bring out a sentence out of yourself, I think that's the most important thing. The floweriness or the beauty of your language or your essay doesn't really matter in the grander scheme of things.
Yeah, I agree. And so you were saying, Amber, that the essay was your hardest part. Did you write full essays and get feedback? Did you do essay plans? I'm thinking about in the summer when you were sort of increasing the level of work that you were doing on the LNAT. So in the summer between your lower six, so we're talking about kind of like late June, July time, when you sat the exam in October. So you still got several months. Did you write full essays and get feedback, or did you do essay plans and outlines and get feedback and discuss those?
Over the summer, I barely did any essays, if I'm being honest. I did more of the MCQ. So like, that's why I said like by the time I started upper six, where it was the most critical time for preparation, I mainly focused on the essays because I was familiar enough with the MCQs. As for essays, I spent September actually doing essays, like full essays, and I would get my head of sixth form / head of law to review them, and he was very critical, which I really appreciated. I think a number one skill that you have to adapt in this field, applying for Oxford or applying for any competitive university, is to be able to take feedback and asking for criticism. And so because he was very critical, it was really helpful for me to produce a better essay in a shorter span of time. So I didn't have to write 20 essays, I could only write 5, but they were consistently getting better. But closer to the date, I'd say between at the start of October leading up to my exam, I did more essay plans and just going through as much as topics as I could and disagreeing and agreeing. So I would verbalize more because I could work under time conditions, because based on my September trying. So when I was in October, it was just whether or not I could disagree with myself and produce a coherent argument for each topic. Yeah.
Okay, great. I actually just thinking about the way it's structured with the MCQ and the essay. Did you find the exam tiring? It's quite long, right? Did you find it tiring?
It feels like a marathon because we being an A-level student, even an SVM student, we've never done anything that long. You've never had to sit and think as critically as you have for that period of time. So I think for anyone who's preparing right now, lower six, make full use of the fact that you have enough time to do full papers, because closer and closer to the date, you'll have your especially if you're applying to competitive universities, you'll be doing a lot of other preparation as well on top of the LNAT, and so you won't have as much time to do proper full runs. And I think familiarizing yourself earlier would mean that you are more comfortable by the time you have to do 90 minutes for 42 questions and then a whole essay afterward, because they don't give you a break. And so you have to complete everything in the given time. And that's quite a challenge, I'd say, even when I did it on the day itself. So I think familiarizing with yourself with the timing is quite an important thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so Sujin, you were famously Mr. Last Minute with things, despite getting the highest MCQ score of your batch quite convincingly. Having tutored students through this process and seen lots of them, and understanding that students learn and prepare in very different ways. I mean, we're giving you ideas, but you each carve your own route that suits you. What would you have done differently in your prep when you were 17, given what you know now about this test?
I think I was kind of guilty of what I think is probably the worst way to prepare for the LNAT, which is just I do more past papers equals more better. That was definitely my mistake. Don't just sit there and keep on doing MCQs and thinking that without any reflection at all, doing more MCQs will make you score a higher mark in the LNAT. I do think that quite a fair amount of people in my cohort as well were guilty of that, of just grinding it out as hard as possible and wanting to see results from that, because I think it just doesn't work for the LNAT. So definitely just thinking about the processes and how we think, that is way more important. So I would have just focused on that.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because Oxford University gave a webinar about this a couple of years ago, and they said something very similar to what you're both saying, that more is less. And that actually, Amber's saying she did 4 or 5 papers, but really analysed what she was doing in each of those papers was much more valuable than doing 20 past papers in time conditions. And I know from the STEM admissions test, that's something very similar advice. All right, great stuff. So any final bits of advice, Sujin?
So before the exam, eat a light meal. Don't eat anything too heavy. Don't eat anything spicy. Make sure you don't want to find yourself needing to pee in the middle of your exam. So please make sure that look, it's all well and good if you prepare for the exam very studiously, but if the day comes and you are having a high fever or you need to use the toilet midway through the exam, a lot of that effort's going to go out the window. So make sure you get those steps right as well. Make sure you take care of yourself up until the exam.
Yeah, good advice, because, every minute counts in this exam, because there's so much that you have to do in that period of time. Amber, any last tips or advice?
I have 2. The first one is for like lower sixes. As I feel like they are probably the ones watching this most probably. Focus on your AS now. Like, please do not worry about LNAT yet, because while it is good to have exposure, I would never recommend to stress on it this early, because even as studious as I was preparing for the AS, I still had to resit a math paper, and I feel like if I had like focused more on my AS, I wouldn't have to deal with the time constraint that I had later in upper six. So focus on your exams first so that you'll have time to focus on your LNAT later. And secondly, I think it's really important to really find your community, and it doesn't have to be like a huge group of people. Just one or two friends is more than enough. And broaden your horizons. I discussed these topics with friends who did the TSA as well, because the TSA is also an exam that has essay topics. So more or less the topics are going to intersect. And so it's really good to not limit yourself to just LNAT people, because you meet people with different perspectives, and it really helps you to just gain as much knowledge as you can for the exam. So I think don't limit yourself to merely law takers or merely LNAT people or merely Oxbridge applicants. Variety is really good.
Fantastic advice. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the subtle prep you were doing anyway, because you were doing all of those debate things. You were, I know whenever a law lecturer came into school to talk, you were always engaging with them. You were always asking questions. So you were always very curious. If you weren't actually formally doing an LNAT paper, you were broadening your experience and your knowledge and your ability to articulate your views on things and to ask questions and hear other people. So I think you're right. It's that kind of constant prep, and both of you really keen on the debate and the skills that you get from that. And I love your advice about community. I agree. And it's a stressful process, right? So nice to do it with somebody else.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
It's just a lot more enjoyable when you're actually talking to someone as opposed to just staring at a screen for 4 hours. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. The moral support that you get from that and the vibrancy that you get from that is invaluable. So thank you very much, Sujin and Amber, for joining us for this episode of the Beam Pod, talking about the LNAT exam. Good luck with your final A2 exams, Amber, and good luck. You're welcome. Good luck with your students who are about to embark on their AS exams, Sujin.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Bye.